MCP fam. My name is Monte, she, her, a modern classroom's expert mentor.
And I'm Toni Rose, she, her, a modern classroom program manager. And this is Keeping Up with the Modern Classrooms.
Okay, well, we may change the name. If you have a more clever name for the show, please share it with us.
And also, Facebook Live was a headache. So we're revamping to a much better format, fingers crossed. And I have to say, this is all Monty's idea. So Monty, tell us more about you and this great idea of yours.
So instead of our monthly Facebook Live, where we basically talk about a topic, we decided that we're going to do it in kind of like a video format that we are going to post to YouTube every month. So we would do one every month, just like our Facebook Live. It's going to be 30 minutes, the same amount of time. But instead of, posting it and sharing it directly through the group, we're going to be posting it on YouTube, and we're going to have a playlist. And we just want to have a more holistic place where everything is, so it's easy to be found later on. In our video, we're going to talk about the member of the month. We're going to shout them out. We're going to talk about our topic of the month, and we're going to share some resources that exist in the modern classroom world to give those of you that are at home building some visuals to be able to see. In addition, we're also going to still work on answering some of the questions that we've seen in the Facebook group to make this still a way to help you achieve your modern classroom.
Yes. And Monty, where are you located right now?
Right now, I am in Atlanta, just moved here. I'll be teaching 7th grade science this upcoming school year, and I am super excited because 7th grade is life science, and it's the best science, obviously.
Sure. And I am currently in Washington State. And so I taught middle school English for 10 years, and I was an instructional coach for a year. And now I am working full-time with Modern Classroom. So life couldn't be better. All right. So we want to give a shout out to Kevin Campbell, woo woo, member of the month for June. So thank you so much. We've noticed your thoughtful responses to questions and concerns, and we are all here for it. So thank you to all of our members, and keep contributing. We also want to keep you posted with the fact that we do celebrate 2 members a week, both get a sticker, and a member of the month who gets a free t-shirt. So if you are part of this group, continue to engage, ask questions, respond, share your resources and ideas and all of that good stuff. So Monty, let's move on to our topic of the month.
So it is July 22nd, and thus our topic of the month is Unit 0. Many of us, especially if you're like me, you go back to work in 12 days. We're beginning to think about how we're going to roll this out to our students. So Toni Rose and I are going to spend time today talking about, what the beginning of the year could look like in a modern classroom format, how you can go about introducing the model. We've been getting lots of questions in the Facebook group as people are joining, as we're starting to think about it. So we thought that this would be a really great way to get some of those questions answered without necessarily bombarding the Facebook group with more writing. And then we just wanted to give some of our really amazing mentors and implementers time to also share their experiences to highlight some of the things that they've done.
Yes, thanks, Monty. And so do you want to kind of talk about how you introduce the model to your students?
Yeah, so whenever I've introduced the model, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to do this in 2 different school years, 2 different schools, 2 different environments, which has been really interesting. I always choose to introduce it like in the same lens that I would in my traditional class. So, we do a lot of our team building activities. We do some getting to know you type stuff. I always have my students, do a letter to Miss Woodard type of assignment. Even in the modern classroom, I still do all of those things. Some of them are self-paced, it just depends, but a good chunk of them we're actually doing together as a class because it's a new environment. We're coming together. And I just think, doing those things whole class sometimes are really, really great. And then as we get a little bit more towards kind of the end of the getting to know you and more into like beginning content, I start to branch it off a little bit and start to do a little bit more of the modern classroom format where they watch a video about modern classroom. I have them take guided notes. I explain, the classification of the should do, must do, and aspire to do to them. I have them practice a few science skills. And I have them do all of this with the goal of taking a master check at the end. So teaching the model through the model, that was one of the first things that Kareem Farah said to me when I first started doing this. And it's just always stuck with me. Have them practice the model by doing the model. And it's so cool.
Yeah, most definitely. So, very similar to Monty's experience, I taught sixth grade English, and we actually started on day one that students came in. Now, mind you, at our school, Monty and I used to teach at the same school in DC. The students already had their technology, so they already had their Chromebooks before the first day. So we had an orientation. That was when the students got their Chromebooks, and so by the first day, they were able to come in with everything set up in their Chromebooks. So first day, my colleague Emily and I started the modern classroom, and it was just, hey, here's a video on how to, introducing sixth grade English, and then getting students to kind of walk through that. So what that looked like for us is that when we planned, we wanted to do a unit 0 that was 4 weeks long. And because we planned it that way because of all the events that were happening in the beginning of the school year, and there were a lot of interruptions. So we kind of wanted to make sure that it was something that we were introducing the model, as well as just like talking about overall what the school year is going to look like and what skills we're going to cover for our class for the entire year. And so we had a one pager for a unit 0, and then we had a modern classroom one pager for families and observers. And so mind you, all of these things are going to be shared with you, so you can make copies, you can do whatever you'd like with it. And so let me see if I can share my screen real quick so that you all can see. This is my favorite part. It's like when we talk and then have to share screens, and it's like, ugh, so many different things. All right, cool. Here we go. Oh, and also my dog may start barking.
And while Toni Rose is getting that pulled up, I want to just touch a little bit more on how we're going to share these resources. So if you're a fan of the podcast, at the end of every podcast, or maybe you don't know, and I'm also giving you some knowledge here, but at the end of the podcast, they do what's called show notes, where they link a bunch of links, links to the Modern Classroom website. Any resource that they talked about in the podcast will be linked. We're going to also have show notes that we post in the description on YouTube. So if you want to be able to find those things, please make sure that you check our YouTube description to be able to see links to all of the resources that we're going to talk about today and more.
Yes, thank you, Monty. And I'm sure a lot of you listen to the podcast, like Zach. Shout out to Zach and Kareem and Kate for co-hosting that podcast. So this is essentially what we gave our students. So we create a Hyperdoc for each of our lessons. And as you can see here, we have our must-do objective, the materials, the tabs open. We have our steps, and then the mastery check, as well as the extension. So if you, let me see here, this is the unit 0 one pager. So for every unit that we had for English, we had a one pager that we gave out to families, to admin, to our co-teachers, whoever else, and our students as well. So they have access to this, so they can kind of preview what's going to happen for unit 0. So we include our key skills, the graded work that's going to be happening for the unit, our IB grading scale, because we were an IB school, and then the writing prompts, as well as like vocabulary homework, and then important dates. And so students have access to this unit one pager, and then we provide this one pager for our families and observers, just so that people know exactly what we're doing. Again, modern classroom seems a little bit, odd, not really a traditional way of teaching. And so it's really good to have a one pager for your families and visitors, just so that they're aware of what's happening in the classroom when they walk in. Sometimes it's like an organized chaos, and sometimes it seems like people are working independently. So it's just really good to know, to have some kind of information for your families and your visitors. Now, mind you, the document for you that we're going to share is actually an updated version of this, so it's actually much better. So and you'll get that, and I'll show that to you in a little bit as well. And then we also started out with a unit 0 do now, and so this is something that students come in and complete every single day. As you can see, this is like our very first do now, and so that we've changed this so much already, but just having the first name and last name, our students were like, Ms. D, that was too much. Can't you just like do the emails, collect the emails? And so they don't have to write their names every single time. And we did this unit do now as a grade, and so we decided to separate it so that we have separated like results as well. And so just talking about today I'm feeling, and all of that good stuff, right? So again, we started out with Modern Classroom day one. Like we were just like, hey, you know what? Let's just dive right into it, and we can see like what we need to work on, and what mistakes we'll make, so that we have a little bit of a better understanding for Unit 1 when we actually dive deeper into our content. And Monty was talking about as well, like icebreakers and getting to know you activities. We also incorporated that in our Unit 0, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as well, as we share some of the resources. All right, so Monty, do you want to kind of start with the different resources that we have for them? Oh, you're muted.
Hi. I would love to start off by talking about our family communication toolkit, because our families are, outside of our relationship with the students, they are, going to be our most important factor here in making sure that students achieve the success that they need. So this family communication toolkit is really great. One of my favorite resources that exists, because it gives a lot of guidance on how to communicate this with families. What I found when I first rolled this out, I was very nervous because I wasn't sure how parents were going to feel about it. And mostly they just came in with questions. They were like, I want to know what this modern classroom is about, because I've heard my student talking about it. Like, just tell me about it. Oftentimes they just want to know, that their kid is going to be safe and that they're going to be able to learn things and be able to achieve what they're used to achieving in class. So in this family communication toolkit, you're going to be able to find some resources on, how to talk about this with students. Parents. You're going to also have, like a personalized handout, the one that Toni Rose showed, that's linked here as well. You can, format it to fit your own class. I just had copies printed out for back to school night at school, and I just handed them out to parents. For kids whose parents could not come to back to school night, just sent them home with the handout just for some additional information. Sometimes, especially if you're not at a school that's one-to-one, we didn't necessarily experience this a lot, but because we were at a one-to-one school and students knew that they were going to, parents knew that students were going to be on Chromebooks pretty much a lot of the day. Wow, that's beautiful now. Sorry. I haven't seen it. It's been updated. It's beautiful. I love this. It is really, oh my gosh, guys, look at that. That is beautiful. That is the document you'll get to make a copy of. So we do have something in here to kind of talk about screen time and, making sure that parents understand that in a modern classroom, they're not necessarily just staring at their screen the whole time. There's a lot of stuff that goes on outside of the staring at the screen. But if you have parents who are concerned about that, there's a resource there. Talking about the progress tracker, sometimes parents are very unsure about progress trackers. Teachers are unsure about progress trackers. So, we have some information in here about how you frame it. Remember, progress trackers are really about showing progress, not necessarily making anybody feel bad, showing grades, things like that. So there's some guidance in here. And then, just talking about the research that Modern Classroom has gathered about, how this works, does it work, etc. The research is also linked there. So really great resource to kind of bookmark, especially at the beginning of the year, as you're getting questions from families, as you're getting questions from administrators. It's a really great resource to have.
Yeah, and again, you're gonna have a copy of this as well, so that you can copy and paste and revise and edit so that it goes with your classroom. Something too that we kind of, when we first rolled this out in back to school night with the parents and the families, the biggest concern was like screen time. Like, oh, so my child's gonna be on their computer the entire time, and that's actually not true. There's a lot of opportunities for collaboration, for off the computer activities and tasks, and so like, I think just because it's such a new model, we want to provide them the information and as well create that space where they're able to ask questions, ask clarifying questions, and maybe even we can talk about the misconceptions that they have as far as what Modern Classroom really does. And then the next resource that we wanted to point out is the Modern Classroom podcast. So this is episode 2, where it's basically just rolling out the model. It's got some good ideas by Kareem and Zach, where you can kind of figure out like, okay, how do I do this exactly? So if you want to go take a walk, if you're walking the dogs or you're working out, because I know I listen to podcasts when I work out, you are more than welcome to check it out and get some more ideas.
And I'm on there, guys. I'm on this episode of the podcast. Did not know that until just now, but I'm on there as well. So enjoy my voice.
Yeah, see, look, joined by Monty Woodard. Ayo. Also, Monty's in a lot of episodes, so you're gonna hear her voice a lot, which is amazing because she has phenomenal ideas, just like this show, right? And then you want to talk a little bit about this, Monty?
Yeah, so we have a whole, section of the website that's like dedicated to exemplar units. And if you haven't seen it, please, please, please get on there because, these resources are really great. And, I have one on there for science called Natural Resources, and it's dope. So, look at it because it's great. But outside of that, we have a few introductory units that are linked on there, unit zeros. We're working on getting more on there. So stay tuned, as the school year rolls out, we're hoping to get some more stuff linked on there. And then there's just resources for other content. So elementary school English, it's split by subject, and there's, maybe 3 to 4 of each one for each subject on there. And it's just a really great place to look if you're struggling about how can I lay out my stuff, what kind of activities are people doing, how are they differentiating their work. Just really great to look at. I believe the health one is for, what we're considering for middle school and elementary school, and introduction to history, I think it was high school, correct?
Yep. So intro to health, I believe, is 7th grade, and then history is a high school. And that is by our very own Kate Gaskell. So definitely check that out. So it'll take you straight to a Google site, and you'll have all of the information here that you can look at and how it looks for the intro of modern classroom and health. And then we have, this is something that a mentor shared. Joanna actually shared this. Let me see if I can switch it on over. Can you see this, Monty?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. So as you can see here, this is a unit 0 playlist. I believe she teaches 9th. Yeah, it says there, 9th grade English. So, Monty was a huge fan of this, the visual aspect of it. And so we're assuming that Joanna used Canva, possibly, but you can do it this way too. So if you're like, hey, you know what, I'm a little bit more creative and I want to do more visuals, you're more than welcome to. So in this case, you can see what Joanna did as a must do, and then should do as well, and aspire to do here. And as you can see, like on the side, she also has like what you need. And so this one, like, you don't need Wi-Fi or internet. This is a collaborative work. This is solo. So it's actually really cool, the different icons that Joanna used for her class. So you can do something like this as well.
Yep. I'm on record to say that I will be utilizing this because I fell in love with this template. I'm a big fan of Hyperdocs. If people know me, talk about them all the time. So like, this is just beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes I wish I had the time and the capacity to do something as beautiful, but I know me, it would be like a time sucker and I would spend all day creating this thing. But if you're really good at it, go for it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Oh, and my dogs are fighting. So Monty will talk about the next one.
Yes. So our next resource that we have linked is, give me a second while it is loading on my computer. Oh, are we talking? Sorry, I hope Jasmine can cut this out. Is it Slack? Is that what we're talking about next?
No, this one would be the slide templates, unit 0.
Oh, I clicked the high school.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, all right, great. Perfect. So the next resource that we are going to talk about is our slide template for unit 0. The reason why this is a really great resource is because you can make a copy of it, customize it, for yourself, and kind of plug in, things for your modern classroom. So if you go through the slides, you'll see that it kind of gives you some guidance on, what to put, what to include, what to talk about. And again, none of this are super necessary, but I think it's a really great way to kind of start off with what kind of things you could be talking about. I do something very similar in my class. I have students watch a video. Normally I couple mine into one video because it's like really short. It's like not long, but if you're going to do a lot of talking, you should definitely split it up into multiple videos. And each one can cover something different. So this one, for example, can cover expectations and tips. The video before can talk a little bit about how's this class going to function, where you kind of talk about the ins and the outs of how you're going to organize work and things like that. And then the first video can just give them like a really big overview of like, hey, let's get to know each other,
Thanks, Monty. And this is actually one of our newer resources. So we'll still probably be developing and making some revisions, but we wanted to make sure to share it with you that we do have something to use as a guidance for when you're creating your slides. One thing that I did for English too is that we actually, so we had on the second week, so the first week we just, talked about the model and how it's going to look like and where students can find things in the classroom. And then the second week, and that was only 2 days for us because we started on a Thursday, I believe. So it was a really odd first week. And then the second week was when we started incorporating some getting to know you activities. So we know throughout the school year for sixth grade, we're talking about making inferences. So as a way, so before I actually talked about who I am as a teacher and introduced myself, we created, I showed a picture, a selfie of me doing something really cool, right? And then the students were able to make inferences about who I am as a teacher. Now, keeping in mind that we did have a conversation about inferences versus assumptions and versus uneducated guesses. And so that was a really important conversation that we did. But then students were able to then kind of further mastery check, create a slide with their selfie and then little things that they were interested in. And then students were able to their peers were able to make inferences about them based on what they shared. Okay, and then as far as
I absolutely love that idea, Toni Rose. I actually do something similar where I have students, create slides and we write, 3-sentence stories about each other. And again, before we do this, we definitely have a conversation about we don't make negative assumptions about people and things like that. But, I like to show them a slide of pictures of some of my favorite things. So maybe I include a picture of my nieces who I'm obsessed with. And I'm a big fan of Disney. So, I include myself standing in front of the Disney castle. Maybe I put a book because I like to read. And then I just ask the kids, hey, so write a story about this person. And it's so interesting because everybody's story comes out so different. And then you spend some time, saying let's reveal the real story. And I mean, we did this over Zoom. I can't wait to be able to do this in person next year, because I think I can see myself doing some collaborative groups where they're in groups of 3 to 4 and they're doing this in small groups. And then, those kids that are willing to share whole class, we can do that. So I'm glad you brought that up because it reignited that I need to do that too.
Yeah, and then even to tie in with what's happening in the real world too, I included some selfies that went viral about what's happening in the world. So then students were able to analyze the photo, make inferences about it, and learn something about what's happening in their world. So keeping them engaged, keeping the information relevant, those are all pretty good things to include in your unit 0. So when we introduce when we introduce modern classroom, it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of all the fun things that you do in the beginning of the school year. You can actually continue to do those things. It's just so that if there is a lesson that you're doing or something that you're going over, turning that into a video as opposed to talking for 5, 6, 10 minutes straight. Right. So continue to do what you were doing with your traditional school, as far as traditional teaching, as far as getting to know your students, going over procedures, all of that good stuff. And then we had a couple of questions about younger students. So this is, me, Monty and I were not well versed in elementary, so we're always reaching out to Cheyenne. Woo woo! Shout out to Cheyenne. And we also have another mentor, Allura, and she teaches kindergarten through 2nd grade. So we have a good range. And so with that being said, do you want to kind of go over what Cheyenne said that she would do for her unit 0, or do you want me to talk about that?
I got it. So Cheyenne said for her unit 0, for lesson 1, she spent some time talking about blended learning and why they're doing it. She has students watch a video and do a mastery check, and they answer the question, how do you feel about blended learning after watching the video? This is the first thing that they'll do. And she said she uses kind of a pathway for them to go through it. So maybe very similar to a Hyperdoc or something like that, but she lays it out in a way that makes sense. She chooses not to explain the classifications of the lessons. but some people can choose to. She just chooses not to. And then as a should do in her lesson 1, she has them talk to a peer about blended learning to see if the students have kind of like the same opinion about it. And as aspire to do, they can make a short video explaining blended learning to their parents. And her LMS is Seesaw, so she's able to do this with Seesaw. But if you don't use Seesaw, you can use things like Flipgrid, which could be really popular to do something like this. Or another platform, I know Canvas has some capability to allow videos and things like that to be uploaded. As her lesson 2, she talks a little bit about her role as a teacher. So like, what is the teacher's role in a blended learning environment? So they again watch another video where she explains it to a student. She also talks about, what the teacher themselves is doing in blended learning. And they do guided notes. And as a should do, they kind of put one question you have about blended learning on a post-it note, and they're going to stick it on what she calls their parking lot. And we'll get more guidance from Cheyenne about what this parking lot entails, and we'll make sure to put in show notes. And then as an aspire to do, she has students compare guided notes with a friend and see whether or not they're the same. And the note here is they should be the same because they watched the same video.
Yeah, and then that was another thing too that I forgot to mention is introducing your LMS right away, right? So whatever LMS you're using, that can be Canvas, Google Classroom, all of that, please introduce that in Unit 0. You can talk about Allura. My dogs are having a great time right now, Monty.
In terms of Allura, she said that she's like never actually done a Unit 0, as most are probably familiar with. Instead, her and her students complete the first 2 lessons of the first unit together. And this allows for her to kind of walk them through step by step. Remember, Allura teaches kindergarten through 2nd grade, so she's dealing with some students that are fresh to school and some kids who just haven't been in school very long. So her method for doing this is to make sure that she can go over each part of the lesson with them step by step, as well as making sure that she can go over expectations, procedures, storage areas in the classroom. And most importantly, she projects the video on the TV screen and they watch it together. And she models for them how they should pause to take notes and etc. Which I think is really cool, given that she teaches such a young demographic of kiddos. My niece is 5 years old, and I just can't envision doing anything learning wise with her because she's all over the place. After the first lesson is completed in its entirety, they watch a second instructional video together, but she lets students begin to kind of work on their own pace after that. When she did kindergarten, she did small groups of students that would still be with her for the 3rd instructional video, and she kind of had them watch videos with a partner or stay close to her while making sure that she's watching them independently, just because, again, kindergartners, if you work with kindergartners, they're kindergartners.
Yeah, and also just keeping in mind when you create videos, you may want to make shorter videos for your younger kiddos, just so that they stay engaged and not like zoning off and doing whatever else they're doing as kindergartners, right? One thing that I really want to point out with what Cheyenne said is the aspire to do is sharing the model with their families. I used to have my middle schoolers record the conversations with their families about talking about what they learned in class, or rather just interviewing their families about what they already know about the topic we're covering in class. So Flipgrid is really good for that. So continue to have those conversations. And I always tell my students, hey, if you're talking about this outside of class, like the better, right? Mm-hmm. So let's shift gears to some of our questions. I know we're kind of going over time, and that's okay. This was our very first one, and you can watch this real quick, change the speed. And so some of the questions that we have, we do want to give a shout out. Megan Gore and Megan Kindred, funny, y'all have the same names, and you had questions about elementary and younger students. So I hope that we were able to answer some of that questions based off of Cheyenne and Allura's answers. And so if you have more questions, that's also okay. Continue to post in the Facebook group. And then as well as Cook and Ashley, they're talking about like the engagement of it. And this we kind of covered with like the icebreakers, right? So Monty does this really cool thing about directions. Can you talk a little bit about that, Monty?
Yeah, so my Can You Follow the Directions activity is just a very generic activity that I threw together where it really forces them to read the directions. And I like to do this on the 1st or 2nd day of school because it lets me know right off the bat who reads directions and who just dives right in. And so if students read the directions, they will see that you have to read all of the you have to read everything and then just sign your name at the bottom, flip your paper over and draw a picture of a house. But if they did follow the directions, like actually follow the directions, some of the things has them like get out of their seats and jump up and down. Some of them has it run around their chair. One of the things has them shout really loud, "I'm king of the world" or queen of the world. And it's just so funny to sit and watch this because it goes on forever. And then the kids get to the end and none of them spoil it because they're like so embarrassed that like they didn't do it right. So they just sit there and watch everyone else make a fool of themselves. And it's a really fun way to be like, hey, children, you're in middle school and you need to follow directions. I also like around the same time, I like to do a what's in the box activity. So you literally get like a shoebox and you throw some random stuff in there. And remember, I teach science. So one of the things that's really important in science is they have to be able to make inferences. They have to be able to make a hypothesis. And you can't always just depend on what you can see. So I throw a bunch of random stuff in the box and they basically have to guess what's in the box. And they only get 3 guesses as a class. And this is a collaboration activity. It forces them to work together as a whole class, knowing they get 3 strikes, you're out kind of thing. And one last one that I choose to do around the same time is I like to group them. I like to have them on the first day in assigned seats that are not really assigned seats, but I group them by letters that they have in their names. And I start with most letters in the front and least amount of letters in the back. And I tell them, I seated y'all in a specific way and I need y'all to figure it out. And as a teacher, it's hilarious because no, they don't get it right off the bat. And it's so funny, but they're getting up and they're talking to each other. And, you know, it's truly an icebreaker. By the time we move on, like most of them have talked to probably everybody in the class. And so it's just a really fun way to get them out of their seat talking to each other.
Yeah, and those are great ideas, right? Like incorporating movement and having lots of conversations, and they're not related or they're not dependent on technology. And again, you know, ways to introduce yourself. You can create a 6-word memoir, just like what Joanna is doing with her students. I love TikTok. So if you make TikTok videos, create like a short 1-minute introduction about yourself. We also talked about 2 truths and one lie, the snowball fight. And these are things, again, that we're going to talk about or include in our show notes. And you can make sure that you have lots of discussions with guidelines too. Let me see. So we had a question from Cheska about limited text setting. We've actually had a couple of questions about this too. If you have limited text setting, I would suggest doing stations. So where you have like one station with technology and then the other ones are like hands-on, and another one with the teacher. And so whatever that may look like, you can create as many stations as you want, or you can do like 2 stations at a time, 3 stations. You can change it every day. It's really up to you. Another mentee, or actually someone mentioned QR codes. So if your students are able to use smartphones in the classroom, you can do QR codes around the class. And so that they can kind of access the information that you want them to access. So these are just some ideas if you have limited text settings. And then the last one is basically like, how much talking or prepping do you do before rolling this out? I say start day 1, right? Like just, you know, again, depending on the technology that you have, I would say start day 1 and make mistakes. Like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I think being authentic and vulnerable and transparent with your students and being like, hey, this is a brand new model that we're all trying out. So we're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. Just jump right into it, because, you know, as teachers, we kind of get stuck with thinking how this is going to work for us and how like, oh, this is going to be a challenge. That's going to be a challenge. And we want to like think about and plan out all the things that could potentially go wrong. And that's good to do. And in this case with the model, just jump right in, you know, like I planned this out with my my colleagues, and we decided it was 4 units. And so we were like, you know what, like, this is how we want it. This is how we envision it. But when you see our unit 0 compared to unit 4, like we've made some huge drastic changes. And that's also okay. Like this is a learning curve for a lot of people, and, you know, your students aren't used to it. You're not used to it. Just say like, hey, we're doing something really cool, something new, something exciting. And you'll definitely have some students who are like, what are we doing? Kind of pushing back, but then they get used to it because they do realize that this is their own learning and they get to own it. So for me, start day 1. For Monte, Monte, you started out with like icebreaker, like get to know you activities, all that. So whenever you want to get started, after you go over your rules, procedures, and like the getting to know you activities. So it's really Up to you, but we encourage you to start it as soon as you can.
Yeah, I'm normally like day 2 or 3. Just depends on like how long the class is.
So Monty, do you want to talk about the next steps?
Yes. So because we're not doing our typical Facebook Live, we're going to start utilizing the power of Twitter to be able to do Twitter chats with you. So a week after our show is published, we're going to host a Twitter chat to talk a little bit more about Unit 0. So please join us. This is going to happen at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you have more questions, you want more resources, you want to widen your network, etc. And if you don't have Twitter, if you don't know what Twitter chats are, you don't have a Twitter, it is a safe place. We've never hosted a Twitter chat before. This will be the first time for Toni Rose and I, so we'll probably make a lot of mistakes as we did with Facebook Live. But please make sure that ahead of time you follow at Modern Classrooms Proj on Twitter to be able to keep up with the Twitter chat information.
Awesome.
And, sorry.
Go ahead, Monty. Sorry.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
And as millennials, and Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus says, take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. See you all next month. Bye.